Welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, excuse me, Dr. Dave Peltz. Along with me, as always, my esteemed colleague, Dr. Joe Hamlett. How are you doing today, Dr. Joe?
I'm doing pretty good, Dr. Dave. It's our special day of the week,
It
so I'm
is.
I'm doing very well.
Excellent, excellent. So, we'd like to welcome back all of our viewers and listeners. If you're new to the show, we hope you enjoy this episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast, your personal, professional, career development podcast. And if you're a returning guest or a returning listener or viewer, we really appreciate your support. So with that, we're going to dive into today's topic, and that is, which game are you playing? So, Dr. Joe, what do you think about when we bring up the topic, which game, not if a game or what game, but which game are you playing?
Well, I got one question. How do you know I'm playing games? I mean, that's that's the most obvious question.
Right, right.
Um, no, I think that's a very good topic, and that's a very good question. So if you think in terms of the game of life,
Hmm.
then we're all playing some type of game.
Right.
But I think for clarification purposes for this podcast, I think Dave is referring to which game you're playing as far as not necessarily life, maybe your organization. Are you playing the game that gets you further in your organization? Are you
Hmm.
playing the game that gets you further on your own personal development? Or are
Hmm.
you playing the game to fit in? I mean, so
Right.
this could mean a lot of different things when we talk
Hmm.
about which game are you playing. And
Hmm.
so I often think, we've said this many times on our podcast, the game that I want to play is the game that makes me happy, for one, the game that I choose and define what success looks like for me,
Hmm.
the game that gets me the best benefits and gain for my family. So
Hmm.
when I think in terms of games, that those are the games that I think of that are most important to me. So again, if we think in terms of our jobs or organizations, some of us do have to play certain games. Was just having a conversation with a group of people this past week, and they were trying to figure out or map out what their career looked like at that organization. And
Hmm.
so my suggestion to them was, you may have this idea of what you want to do, this plan mapped out,
Hmm.
but it's not probably not going to be in total alignment when it comes again to your organization, because there's a responsibility level expectation for your organization, and you can try and latch on to it, but in a lot of cases that they don't align totally. So you may
Hmm.
have to change your game a little bit. You may have to play both boards,
Right,
play
right.
the organization game as well as a game to get you moving forward. So
Hmm.
I'll end it with that. I mean, I know I kind of touched on a few different things, but
Yeah, yeah. I
just
like the aspect about understanding which game you're playing from an organizational alignment perspective. We've talked a lot about organizational alignment offline, and it does make you think, when we first start working in a new organization, we're in that honeymoon phase, we're in that,
yeah,
new
yeah,
job high, we're excited. And either because we have a job, or it's the job we've been wanting, or it's a promotion we've been wanting, or it's been an opportunity financially. And but once we settle down, we have to figure out again, which game are we playing? Is it for
right,
ourselves? Is it for the company? Is it for the organization? Is it for the team, the department? Is it a cultural aspect like supporting employee networks? Is it working on fringe projects for the company? Maybe it's an engineering company or government entity, or maybe it's a scientific or engineering based company or tech based
right.
company, and you're working on something new. Is that the game you want to play? Is working on the fringe projects? And then there's the folks that just want to play the game that hey, I'm coming in, I'm doing my time, and I'm going home to spend time with my family or do the things that I really like to do. And I think it's important to think about those things, to consider it, because you may be playing a game and not realizing which game you're playing
Right.
until something positive or negative happens,
Absolutely.
and it could boil down to your network where you're playing your game, and then someone says, "Hey, we have an opportunity for you. We want you over here." And you have to decide, do you want to go over there? Do you want to go that next level? Do you want to take on that additional responsibility? Or are you good where you're at supporting your team? Because when you think about that perspective, being afforded an opportunity to play a new game or a different game or a different
Right.
level of the game, you may be leaving your team behind. Either you're supervising them or your peers. And, what is that going to do to that team? And sometimes that is a consideration.
Right.
Maybe you don't want to leave your team in a lurch, or maybe you think they're going to be better off without you, or maybe they're mature enough as a team to be able to accept and move on with your advancement or your lateral or what have you. So when we think about game, there's a lot of connotations to that, and sometimes it's negative. Maybe there's those
Right.
people that are playing the game, those pseudo transformational leaders. They're there to make it seem like they're there supporting the organization to better the
Right.
organization when they're really just out for their own
Right.
game and gain. And and that could to be, to a lot of people's detriment. There can be a lot of collateral damage. It's the proverbial bull in the china shop. And we're not talking about the one with the ballerina shoes that tiptoes around everything nicely. We're talking about the ones that just burst through.
Right. Yeah.
And we have to understand not only which game we're playing, but which game are other people playing, and or are they playing multiple games and multiple sides. So this can be a very deep topic very quickly, both positively, negatively, and on the fringe of a lot of things that we've discussed.
Right. No, you bring up some good points. Part of that, and we're referencing game, but we're really talking about, what are you doing as far as um, getting again your personal development, your
Mhm.
organizational development, your career development. That's what we're really referring to.
Right.
It's just this. We use this fun. Uh, phrase to identify these things, but it really still comes back to you defining what your goals are, and
Mhm.
so aligning again with your organization to get to that next level, or your own personal development or gains. So
Mhm.
I think you bring up a good point as far as identifying. And maybe you alluded to this but didn't say it, but identifying what piece you are in the
Right.
game. If you're in reference to a game, if you think about Monopoly, are you the shoe or are you the car? I mean, what
Mhm.
role are you playing on that board or that game that you're
Mhm.
playing? Um, and so, like you say, sometimes it could be negative, it could be positive. But I think again, aligning with or defining what your goals are is going to help you determine what piece you want to be or what play role you want to play on that team, or if you're going to play this game by yourself,
Right.
that you're going to try and achieve the goal without any assistance, or vice versa. So I think it's, again, we're referencing this game, but it's really about, and I'll go back to what I said at the very beginning, the game of life.
Yeah.
So how do you fit in? Where are you trying to go on this game board? Is it aligned with what you want? Because sometimes you may have to play a slightly different game, or you may be
Yeah.
playing two or three games at the same
Right.
time to get you where you need to go. And that's okay. But again, I think still most important is the alignment to where your ultimate goal is, where
Mhm.
you hope to end up at the
Mhm.
end of this. So again, dependent on or versus which game you play, is it going to still lead you to? And that was kind of the conversation I had with this group of people. Yeah, you may have to alter your path. You may have this perfectly identified path that you want to take to get you to the next level. But again, life, your
Mhm.
family, your job, all these things come into play and have to be really considered heavily. So are you still going to be able to take that straight path that you thought you were going to take? And
Mhm.
so that's again when you may have to play some different games to help you get where you need to go. So
Right.
by the end of it, you might be proficient at a ton of different games,
Mhm.
which again still is a great thing because the more experiences, the more things we are involved in, we'll be able to reach back into that pool of information and knowledge that we've gained to help us proceed, move to our next level or the next thing, or join another game. Yeah,
Right.
so it's all relevant. It's just how you view it. But like you said, like Dave said, if you're not playing any game or not aware you're in a game, that could be a detriment to you because it could something could sneak up on you. For instance,
Hmm.
if you're been with an organization for a lot of years, you've enjoyed your time and experience there, and that's what you've committed your whole time to, and you haven't done anything to better yourself or to be prepared for the next level, and then the organization merges with another company, and your position is no longer required.
Right.
Then what do you do? Again, now you're forced to play a totally different game, which could be unemployment or not being able to acquire or join a new organization. So a lot of those things could, again, depending on which game you're playing, could determine where you end up in the future.
Yeah. And I'm gonna kind of dovetail off of that. And we have to understand. Got a little frog in my throat trying to get it out. Um, is understanding our motivations and the company's motivations and what the obstacles are to those motivations. It could be personalities, it could be social, it could be geographic, it could be, financial for the company or yourself. There's a lot of different possibilities. So understanding which game you're playing is very important. Are you playing the right game? Are you playing the right game for you? Or are you playing the right game for the
Right.
company?
Yeah.
Because when it boils down to it, we're all just numbers working for a company, and numbers can be easily replaced.
Right.
There's lines
Right.
of people that would love to have anyone's position at any given time. So when we think about that game, is that the game that we want to be playing? Because there are some companies and organizations that are focused on the viability and success of the individuals and the employees' happiness, because that does typically produce better results. It takes a little bit longer, but the results tend to be better and a lot stickier. That means that the results are going to have a lot more longevity than the
Right.
quick, let's say, I'm going to motivate you with money, or a bonus that's very short term. So when you think about the obstacles to the game, it's we got to think about things like that, not because they're fun and we, oh, that's negative. It's not that it's negative. It's and is what it is. We need to consider these things.
Right.
It's like if you're having a surgical procedure, are you going to go off of one opinion or are you going to get a couple opinions?
Right.
Are you looking at, all the pros and cons to this procedure? What are some of the risks? What are some of the unknowns that you don't know about? I mean, because we're not the people doing the procedure on ourselves typically. I mean, that would be kind of weird, but
Right.
you think about, what type of research have you done? What type of expanding your knowledge have you done within the organization, within yourself, within your team, to really get a good, clear picture of what the game is that's being played? A lot of people have experienced, companies touting one thing or another. They're really good at this, or they're really good at that, or they're open to this and they're open to that, or they promote this or they promote that ideal. And when you're actually working for those organizations or teams or companies, it's a lot different. It's kind of, I'm not going to do any more analogies, but, you know, when you think about it, hyping one thing and then only doing it halfway or very little or just checking a box is a lot different than being committed to whatever that cause or that ideal is.
Right. Well, and I don't think we've touched on this yet, but what if you're in a position in your organization that you don't you figured out what their game is, or you think you understand what their game is, and that you don't fit. So that may be the time that you make the decision to not play that game and
Right,
actually look for kind of along the lines that you're talking about. An organization might be promising one thing and doing another, so
right.
that may be a time where you look at the board and say, "Hey, I don't want to play this game. I'm going to
Yeah.
move forward, or I'm going to move on." So that is, again, we haven't talked about that, but that understanding what game you're playing is critical if you're trying to
Mhm.
figure out what your next move is. Again, whether you're going to stay aligned to an organization, or if you're going to continue to, move forward, understanding what game you're playing, and then, maybe get to a point where you've achieved everything you can in this particular game, then you move on to another. But I think go back to what I said at the very beginning, understanding your goals or defining your goals, where you want to go. You may have to play several games to finally
Right.
get you to that point, to reach that final destination. But again, it could include you saying, "I'm not playing that particular game,
Right.
so I have to move on, even if it doesn't align at the time." But that's also, you realize this game is not going to get you where you want to go.
Right.
It
Right.
could be a detriment to what you're trying to achieve, where you're trying to go. So
Yeah, Joe, and I like that you said that piece about knowing where you want to go, because that is a big piece of the game. Are you doing
right,
it just because it's the first opportunity that came up? Sometimes it is. Sometimes we got to do what we got to do. But
right,
there may be a realization after a short period of time or long period of time that the game does need to be changed,
right,
or you need to change the game. And are you going to change it internally, or are you going to go someplace else where maybe you're better aligned? And,
right,
those are important considerations for not only our personal, professional, and career development, but for our own mental development. Are
right.
we
Yep,
taking charge? We've talked about this before. Are you letting someone else take control of your career,
yep,
or are you just floating down the river? And that's a game too, flying under the radar. Maybe that's the game some people want to play, or maybe they want to be a subject matter expert. Do they want to be hyped about being a subject matter expert, or do they want to be that dual game, flying under the radar as a subject matter expert? So understanding what the game is and what the game is not is very
right.
important,
Yep,
because if we understand what the game is, it's a manufacturing company, it's engineering based, and you're in business support. There may be a different game that you need to play, because if it's prominently an engineering company that's manufacturing whatever devices or product they are, that's a game in and of itself, and you may not have the opportunity, as many opportunities as those individuals with that type of background or focus. So,
right.
you know, you really have to do some introspection, some critical self-reflection that we talk about so often about, what game do you want to be playing? Because I've talked to many people and many clients, and they're playing a game that they do not want to play anymore.
Right,
And how do they
absolutely.
get out of that game and into a new game? Or into the game that they want to play, or maybe it's creating their own game, similar to what
Here
we've
you
done
go.
with the
Absolutely.
podcast.
Yep.
We talked about the podcast for a long time, out of having, or periodic conversations to almost daily conversations,
Right,
about these important topics. And finally, we decided that we need to play our own game. It's not that other people aren't out there playing the same or similar game. We just have a different view on a lot of different things because of our backgrounds and our experiences. And I think that's important to bring up, because that diverse perspective on the different games that are out there, the good ones and the bad ones, and the ones that
right.
are what they are important to know. We talk about
Absolutely.
the unknowns a lot. Well, you don't know the unknowns, but what can you do to uncover some of those unknowns? Or are you just sitting back coasting by with the knowledge that you have? What are you doing to expand your knowledge to uncover some of those unknowns? In qualitative research, you research to the point of saturation until you start getting, you've researched to the point of exhaustion and, saturation, meaning that everything that you read or that you research now is repetitive of everything else that you've heard. So that's what you know. Now, what's the part that you don't know, that hasn't been discussed, that hasn't been, you haven't poked that bear, or, tap that lion on the shoulder, because are you afraid that it's going to eat you, or is it going to be an ally for you?
Right. No, you brought up a couple of good points. The first one I'll go back to was the mental piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you maybe play the game too long, you may become, delusioned into that way of thinking or that
Right.
mindset, that may be counterproductive of what you're trying to do or where you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to go. So really being cognizant of the effect it's having on you mentally is also
Mm-hmm.
important, because it could change. You could have goal in mind, or you're aligned to certain things, and then you start playing a particular game. Maybe it's a game where you're trying to advance, and
Mhm.
you may be trying to advance over people or pushing people down for you to, get above them. So,
Right.
that could change who you are as a person, for one, and
Mhm.
and then it could
Could
realign.
fundamentally change you.
Absolutely. So, I think that was a good point you brought up as far as that mental part of it, just understanding if you choose to play a certain game, what type of effects might it have on me. You may need
Mhm.
to consider those types of things. Again, to get you to this next level may mean that you end up ruining all of your relationships that you've established over the
Right.
years. So just really being mindful of the impact that it could have on you mentally if you
Mhm.
choose a certain path, or if you don't really consider the ramifications of your actions.
Yeah.
That was one thing you talked about. And then again, just kind of to piggyback on, because I kind of brought this up a little bit, earlier, about the fact that, all these games you're playing is still an accumulation of abilities and skills and
Mhm.
experience that can be applied for future applications.
Mhm.
Again, as you consider looking at another game to play, then all these things you can again pull out of your toolbox or toolkit and be displayed to show, okay, yeah, these are all the games that I played in the past. So,
Right.
I do have the requirements for this new game I'm going to play. And
Right.
so I think that's also important, again, to take stock of the other games you've played, the other advancements you've made, or all those things that you've accomplished, how they are relevant to whatever you're trying to do. Again, we're really speaking in terms of if you're on a job interview, and
Mhm.
the the scenario you talked about with an engineering firm that's manufacturing. Well, maybe you haven't done manufacturing, that type of manufacturing, but you do have manufacturing experience in your past. So
Mhm.
yeah, just some of that alignment if you're trying to play a different game or go to a different organization, that these things still can apply. So just
Right.
keeping
Right.
stock and taking stock of those things, or like you said, the research you've done that already have in your memory banks that you can recall at any given time. So all that's important when you're considering what's next for you, what's next for your organization, where you're trying to go. All
Mhm.
this is relevant.
Right.
Everything we talk about on the podcast is relevant. It's not just a one and done,
Right.
or a
Right.
concept that I just do this and I'm going to get there. All these things we're talking about are intertwined
Yeah.
and are relevant for whatever position or wherever you're trying to go.
Right. Is it a high risk, high reward? Is it low risk, low reward? Or what is it? What is the dynamic that you're operating in? What does the game look like? I mean,
Right.
is it fairly passive, let's say like golf, where you're one person hitting a ball and the risk of a serious traumatic injury to yourself is relatively low, unless
Right.
you're playing in the rain and you get struck by lightning, which God forbid that happens to anybody. Or you play in a game like rugby, where there's very
Right.
little pads
Yep.
and it's very aggressive and hard pounding and hard charging, and people are going to get injured. It's just how injured are they going to be, and how long are they going to be able to stay in the game, with that type of environment. So, these things are areas that we need to explore and consider when we're thinking about which game are you playing,
Right.
or which
Right.
game are you
Yep.
not playing, which game are you willing to play, which game are you not willing to play. Because as you mentioned a little bit ago, there are some games that are very aggressive in nature, where
Right.
people are stabbing people in the back. Sure,
Yep.
they're advancing, they're getting those big fat paychecks, but what's left behind? How many people have you destroyed in the process? Do you care that you've destroyed those
Yep.
people in the process? That is a certain type of game that certain people can play. Other people are like, no, that's not within my moral or ethical bank. That's on the fringe, that's a line that crosses the gray area.
Right.
So,
Yep.
and there are pros and cons to that too. So, when we think about these things about which game are you playing, you got to understand the game. It's kind of like I could go play poker right now, but I wouldn't understand the game. I don't understand how
Right.
it works,
Right.
how, the counting the cards and knowing, how many of this and that's going on. So I don't play that game.
Right.
Do you want to familiarize yourself with the new game? Do you already know the game? Is there someone better than you at that game? Or are you going to come in and be the top at that game because of what you bring to the table? A lot of this again goes back to that critical self-reflection and understanding what you're willing to accept and what you're not willing to accept.
Right.
And how long are you willing to accept what you're willing to accept?
Right. Yeah. Again, but I think we said at the very beginning, just the whole defining where you're trying, defining your goals, what success means to you,
Mhm.
could determine whether, and I like your analogy about the low impact game or the high impact game, golf or rugby. I mean,
Mhm.
it's really the consideration when you're thinking about your long term success. What will it involve? Will
Mhm.
I have to, go out there and get in a scrum and play rugby, or is it just going to be a nice light game of golf where I can, choose to take swings when I want, and again, low risk. So
Mhm.
it still really comes down to what you're willing to do to get to that next level.
Right.
And so defining what success looks like to you is really a good starting point, because then you can start to outline what it's going to take to get there, what risk am I willing to take, what game am I willing to play, what type of game. So it really starts with you making that decision on what success looks like for you.
Right. Right. Well, we're time has gone by quick, as it usually does for you and I. I'm not sure how painful it is for some others, but for us, it goes by really quick, folks.
Right, right.
So, with that, what final thoughts do you have, Joe?
Yeah, again, we had some fun with this topic. Which game are you playing? And it's really just a play on. And I started off by saying, we're all playing the game of life,
Mhm.
and kind of a really fun terms. So
Mhm.
which thinking about which game you're playing and understand the rules of the game and
Mhm.
understand how it aligns with your game or your ultimate goal. So understanding from the very beginning on what you're committing to, what you're willing to do to play this game. There's a lot of shows out there with these kind of cool games, but again, that some of these games you pay the ultimate sacrifice. So
Mhm.
just recognize what game you're playing. Again, when you go into it, and if you don't know enough about that game, learn quickly, or you
Yeah,
could be headed down
absolutely.
a path that you may not like or appreciate. So
Yeah.
I'll end it with that.
Joe, I couldn't end it better. I mean, I could, but I'm not going to because it's not a competition. Or is it? Because it is a game, right? So, yeah, I couldn't agree more. Understand which game you're playing. If you don't, like you said, Joe, find out quickly.
Right.
With that, we'd like to again thank all of our viewers and listeners for joining us for another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast, your personal, professional, and career development podcast. If you liked what you heard, please give it a like, give it a share. There's lots of folks that could benefit from this. We receive a lot of positive feedback, so the exposure is phenomenal. So we're out here to help everyone. So again, as always, we want you to continue being your not so ordinary you.